You'd have to be blind to pick a fantasy esports servers other than Alpha Draft. Whether it's the fifth game of the day or the first game of the day, they offer all kinds of contests at different price points. What the fuck? 2 Shens? Forget Shens, mate. You could pick all the same players if you want. Everyone could have the same player on their team in Alpha Draft if they so wanted. Now, don't be left feeling frosty because you're not playing at Alpha Draft. Take your best shot, like with arrows or bullets, and blaze your way to some 6 Skrilla today. Or don't. It's the end of that part of the section. So, Monte Cristo, my co-host at Summoning Insight and long-time color commentator for On GameNet, announced on his Twitter that blind pick will no longer be used in the 5th game of series in Korea, in LCK, what was formerly OGN. And understandably, within the same comment, he said, another unique experience to Korean LOL gone. Now, what is significant about this? What is so great about blind pick? Well, first of all, a very good quality that is quite difficult to debate, really, is that because there is side imbalance in League of Legends, and that is more emphasized depending on how overpowered certain champions are in certain patches, blind pick to some degree negates side imbalance because you can pick any champion you want and it can't get taken away. You can't have all the mind games of it. And so if you're on the worst side, it gives you some advantage back, or rather takes away from your disadvantage. So this especially helps when we're in periods where the patching is particularly bad. I mean, just imagine at Season 5 Worlds if you have a 5th game there when there were so many OPs, and it usually forced one of the sides to do at least 2 of the bans on the OPs because it was just what a terrible situation it was. I mean, we had Gangplank and we had Mordekaiser, and then people banning Lulu. I mean, there was obviously some serious problems there. But if you'd have had blind pick, it would have taken away some of those issues. Also means you could have picked all of those, which I guess would have been an abomination. I'm just saying that for the sake of being intellectually honest. But it does take away the problem that you'd have to give up all those bans if you're on the bad side in the 5th game, and then the other team get to pick all the other power picks aside from those OPs. Another thing that's good about it is that it forces a different or new or novel kind of strategical component into the series that doesn't exist in normal series play that doesn't have blind pick, because you can't just pick your best champion, which is the obvious thing that people would think you would do. Because if you just pick your best champion, which is the natural thing, which would be the normal intuitive play to do, well, people are going to predict and anticipate that you will pick your champion. And so they might pick something that hard counters your champion, whether individually, like something like what happened, I mean, this wasn't a blind pick, but at MSI where Pawn suspected Faker might pick LeBlanc, he did, and so then Pawn picked Morgana, which was part of a concept. Or it might even be a whole comp, like they had in EDG, to counter one specific main or best champion for a star player on the other team. Sometimes you can also try to pick power picks, but if you do that, they might also be counted. They might also anticipate that you're going to do that and put out an interesting pick there. In as much as they will scout out what you do in blind picks, and they'll try and look at what your best win rates are and what they seem like you're most comfortable on. I mean, there was, as a result of this, the fact that it's not so obvious, there have been some famous examples of really strange picks. So, for example, in 5th game of OGN Summer 2012, CLGEU's Froggen, who'd played Diana earlier in the series and was one of the champions he wasn't even playing in the meta at the time, but done very well on it, decided to pick Diana in the 5th game because people would anticipate he would play something that was more in the meta, or that he was more likely to play, like Anivia, for example. And so he tried to kind of get ahead of the game of what Frost might do, but actually that didn't really help him out. Actually, probably would have been better on a different champion. Likewise, Deft in Samsung Blue's summer final in 2014 picked Corki when something like Kog'Maw that he was an absolute god on was available. And instead he let Corki go of the other guy, Kog'Maw go to the other guy, Arrow, who fucking smashed the game with it. So you can see how the mind games get involved beyond just literally the strategy. Then there's the fact that obviously if you really want to and you're fantastic at it, maybe you can win all matchups. You really can pick your main. And as a result, we could have a bunch of the all-time best players and best teams playing against each other on their best champions and see some of the highest level League of Legends we've ever seen, especially if they're both very high level and they happen to pick a mirror matchup and we get to see who's better How would they go head to head? How would they anticipate what that champion can do being a master of themselves? That's one of the unique and very fascinating qualities of blind pick. It's also the case that for all people I've seen complain, especially Westerners notably, and say, oh, it adds too much randomness to the game, there are too many cases where, it takes away strategy. Look through history, and I'm not saying here's the thing, because someone who won the blind pick game obviously won the series, the natural inclination would be to say that team is better. But actually, I mean, if you go back and you look at all the blind pick games, and you look at who the historically better team was before and after, in a majority of the cases, the team who won was actually the better team. So actually, I think it has a very good track record in blind pick of the better team winning. You just go back and look, Frost winning all of those ones, Katie Bullets winning a bunch of them. Obviously, later on, you had... one of the few cases, actually, I think, where the team that won wasn't actually so great was the Arrows, where they won 3 in a row, and maybe they were specialists at blind pick. Maybe that's something to say. And they had a good strategy for it. But they weren't necessarily always the best team in each of the series they played. But I think in the majority of the other cases, it was nearly always the best team that won. There were times when Blaze and Frost played it early on, and even if they played a lesser team, the lesser team did great, it'd always be Blaze and Frost who edged it out and got through. There's also the factor about blind pick that it gives you an absolutely unique, novel component to a series that does not exist anywhere else in League of Legends, because it was only used in OGN or OGN type competitions in Korean League of Legends. It was never used in Western League of Legends. It was never used in LCS or any of the other regions. Not only that, it's completely unique even for esports. There's actually nothing comparable in CSGO or StarCraft 2 or Dota 2. So it's a very good gimmick, actually. It adds its own special charm, and it especially was cool for Korea because the other regions didn't have it. Now, it is worth pointing out that it's not like there've been loads of blind picks, despite all the seasons of OGN we've had. I actually will run through it, but there have been, from my count, 22 occasions where there were blind picks. I'm only counting OGN tournaments, like OGN Masters and the OGN Spring, Summer and Winter seasons of champions. I'm not counting any other tournaments. So I counted 22 occasions of it. Now, what's interesting is there were some seasons never had any. So, for example, before OGN Champions began, they had an OGN Invitational. There was no blind pick there. So of these 22 occasions, obviously, that's still not a massive amount, but I'm not going to run through every game. I'm certainly going to give details of every game, but I'm going to go through the most notable ones and the interesting ones in general as I go through all of them. So first and foremost, you have to point out that when blind pick was first introduced in the first seasons of OGN Champions, the reason why it was really interesting is there was one team emerged as being fantastic at it. This was Azubu Frost, later to become CJ Enters Frost. Now, interestingly, in the first season of OGN Spring, there was no fifth games. Oh, no, there was actually. What am I talking about? Because it was actually Mig Frost then who did it. Yeah, what am I talking about? So, for OGN Spring, first season, there was Frost versus Xenix and Xenix Storm. And in the fifth game there was, of the semi-final, there was a blind pick. There was 2 Graves at the time, which was one of the strongest AD carries. Frost managed to edge it out, and that's what would happen. Frost very quickly became this monster team at blind pick, to the extent that they won a massive streak of them until OGN Masters 2013. In fact, I'll count how many they won. They won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They won 5 blind pick games in a row until they got beaten. So they won Frost versus Xenix. Then in OGN Summer, the second season of Champions, Blaze played Frost in the semi-final. Frost won in the blind pick. In the final, CLGEU played Frost. It was Frost who won. Like I said, Froggen picked Diana. It was an unusual pick. OGN Winter season for 2012, Frost played CJ in the round of 8. And this was the CJ, by the way, because remember, this is a Zubu Frost. CJ was Dade and Insec. And Space, interestingly. And it was Frost who won again. And then the semi-finals, here's what's amazing, is that Frost won two blind picks in the same series, technically, because the semi-finals had a very unique format for that one season, where it was 2 best-of-5 series. And if it had been 1-1, there was going to be a one-game decider, like a special blind pick for all of that. So there was 2 best-of-5 series, and actually it was between Frost and Blaze. sister teams, and both went to 5 games, and both were won in the 5th game each time by Frost. So you could see that they were just truly the masters of it. Part of that was they were a very versatile team. They were an amazing team fighting team late game, so they knew what to pick, and they had the strengths of obviously Mad Life and Shy at this point in time. Now, finally, we got to OGN Club Masters. And OGN Club Masters was when the streak was broken for Frost, because this was a tournament where it just took teams that had sister teams, so Frost and Blaze. It was all, I think at the time it was actually called CJ. They'd already become CJ. So that was CJ Entis, and there was Najin, Shield and Sword was Najin, and then you could pick the 5 players from that, and you played your matches. But what's interesting is, in the semi-finals, CJ team played against Zenix and OP combination team. And CJ, in the last game, which was blind pick, decided to use the Frost lineup because that was so famously good in blind pick. And actually, this is where they lost out to Zenix OP. Now, other blind pick occasions, because that's when the streak ended for Frost. And in fact, actually, famously later on, they weren't so great in blind pick anymore. So, another blind pick example, in the Season 2 regional, Blaze played Sword. And this was actually the last game that Reaper ever played for Blaze before he was kicked from the team and they didn't want him as a shot caller anymore. And Sword won it. Sword had come all the way through the regional qualifier and they went to Worlds. OGN Winter, as well as all of Frost's shenanigans, there was another blind pick, which was actually Blaze played Incredible Miracle in the round of 8. Incredible Miracle was Mid King, Lilac, and they won this one in the blind pick. And interestingly, even though Blaze is one of the all-time great teams, even at that point in time, that was actually the first blind pick that Blaze had ever won, because Blaze had always had to play Frost in the blind picks beforehand. Now, summer 2013, KT Bullets rises up, and they play Blaze in the first round of the playoffs, the round of 8. And in this round of 8, in this blind pick, Ryu picks Zed. Now, it's funny that he picked Zed here because he goes ham. He has an incredible game. I think we were like 7-3-3 from memory. And it also kind of gave Blaze flashbacks to Ozone in the previous Champions Season's final, tearing them apart with Dade's Zed. So it was Zed wrecking them again. But the reason why I bring this up is because first of all, Bullets won a blind pick and Ryu was on Zed. So when everyone makes out as though, oh, Ryu must hate Zed and have nightmares of blind pick. Well, yeah, sort of, but he was amazing on that champion and in blind picks too. So OGN Summer, obviously we know Bullets get to the final. They go to a blind pick there because there were 2 games up. SKT brought it back. 5th game, one of the most famous mirror matches of all time. Zed versus Zed, Ryu and Faker. Obviously, Faker does the amazing outplay. Oh my god, the moves, the cleanse, whatever that thing that Doa did was. Interestingly, this game also had the 2 Shens. But there was actually another blind pick game in this season, which was in the 3rd place decider. Frost played against MVP Ozone. And, okay, Ozone won the blind pick, but it is worth saying that in this series, Frost, who had been using Rapid Star for the playoffs, decided to just use Gank by Mom for the 3rd place match, which suggests to me that they just wanted to test out Gank by Mom. They didn't really care about coming 3rd or 4th at the time. In the Season 3 regional, there was another blind pick, which was Bullets versus Frost in the first game to decide who was in 4th place. In this game, we had 2 Shens top lane. We had a ZVZ, mirror match mid lane, which was Ryu versus Gank by Mom. OGN Spring 2014. Shield played a bunch of important blind picks. In the round of 8, the first round, they played against KT Bullets. And this was a series that earlier on, KT Bullet looked like they were going to win, but it gets to a 5th game. And this is where we had a mirror match of 2 Lee Sin jungles, which was obviously Insec, one of the all-time great junglers, versus Watch, who was a steady jungler and played a long time as a veteran for the Najin teams. And Shield won this game and went through the semi-finals. And in the semi-finals, they played Blaze. And the blind pick game there was another mirror match. It was mid lane LeBlanc versus LeBlanc, Goong versus Ambition. The problem here is Ambition, still a very good player, but always on the outside of the elite players. At this point in time, Goong was fantastic, particularly on LeBlanc. And so this ended up costing the team, and it had this famous play that Monty loves, where Ambition actually did manage to get a kill onto Goong, but then I think it was, or was it the other way around? There was some sort of kill in the mid lane where Ambition got like the double buffs. I think it was Goong went all in to get the kill, or maybe it was another player. Whoever it was, they went all in to get the kill, and in doing so, they got the buffs back off Ambition, and that was a key play that Monty always raves about. There was also, and obviously Shield went on to the finals. And the players continue to be haunted by blind picks. They've actually only won 1 blind pick by the looks of this, and they've lost the majority of them in their history. So kind of a nightmare for them. Then there was a blind pick in the third place decider again. This time it was Ozone versus Blaze. And even though we know Ozone was fantastic and later went on to win the Worlds in dominant fashion with that lineup, Blaze took them to 5 games. And in the 5th game, we had Pawn go mental on Yasuo, and that's one of the reasons teams always banned him on Yasuo, and that's one of the reasons why later on at Worlds, when Jack said that line about him not being known for Yasuo, it was like, roll your eyes time, because we know he's a god on Yasuo. Interestingly enough, there had been no blind pick in OGN Winter for 2013, just worth noting, and no blind pick in OGN Spring for 2013 either. So there was another key team to succeed thanks to blind pick, which was KT Arrows. Now, in OGN Summer 2014, actually the last OGN Champions Summer before we switched to LCK, KT Arrows won a blind pick game in all 3 of the playoff series. So in the round of 8, they played against Najin Shield, the team who had been finalists the season before. And this was a great series, and it was especially a great 5th game. Shield was actually leading early on. Now, in this game overall, no significant mirror matches to talk of, but Someday, the top laner of Arrows, who at the time wasn't some god, he was just a good player, really bodied on Kassadin, and Rookie on Yasuo had a really good game as well. So they got through to the semi-finals. In the semi-finals, they played SKTS, which you have to realise was essentially what became SK Telecom in the LCK era, but with EasyHoon in the mid lane all the time, and Bang and Wolf as the bot lane, and Marin as the top lane, but Bengi jungler instead, but at the time they had Horo as their jungler, unless I'm entirely mistaken. So, let me see. Where was it? Oh yeah, SKTS in the semis. So in this game, we had a key mirror matchup. We had Gragas top lane, which tells you that this was a very different meta, because people now will be like, Gragas top lane, but no, it actually was the top lane at the time, wasn't a jungler, or mid laner as it had been in the past. But the key player in this game was Rookie, again bodies, but this time he's on Kassadin. So it showed like the flex pick that they had of Kassadin to top and mid at the time, which is something actually interestingly that Shield also used to do. So then Arrows make it through, thanks to the blind pick, to the final. And in the final, they play Samsung Blue, the dominant team of the era. Samsung Blue has won the spring season. Samsung Blue has won OGN Masters. Now Samsung Blue is playing Arrows in the final. And Arrows is a massive underdog, especially bearing in mind they've only squeaked their way to the final. Now, in this game, interestingly enough, we have a bunch of mirror matches, because we have Maokai versus Maokai top lane, fairly safe pick. Alistair versus Alistair support, quite a strong pick at the time. But as previously mentioned, Deft elected to go with Corki instead of Cogmore, and Arrow went with Cogmore, and Arrow went ham in this game. And actually, Deft had some problems in this game and made some key mistakes. It was actually Dade who played like an absolute hero in this game and did his absolute best to try and save the game, but couldn't overall. And Arrows won the OGN title. Now, in the LCK era, we had some blind picks. So, first of all, in LCK Spring, in the semi-final, we had CJ Entus versus SK Telecom. And CJ had been winning. I mean, obviously SK in the first game hadn't used Bengi and Faker, but then in came the good players. It eventually goes to blind pick, and this isn't a great blind pick game, but it's notable because Faker picks LeBlanc, the champion he's undefeated on, goes fucking mental, 15, 1 and 10. Go watch that game if you want to see devastation by one of the best players of all time. LCK Summer. Now, what's interesting is, in the first round of the playoffs, we had a blind pick, but only in the third game, because that was a best of 3. And so, Ku versus Najin Shield, well, just Najin, I don't know why I said Shield, Najin EM Fire. In round 1 was an Ashe versus Ashe ADC mirror matchup, and Prey, the Ashe ADC for Ku, went mental against his former organization, 919 on Ashe, which would come back to be an interesting feature because we'd later on see Ashe be relevant in the same playoffs. Next round, Ku versus KT semi-final. Lulu versus Lulu top lane. Quite a boring matchup, obviously. The star players in this game was Nagne on Azir, had a really good game, and then Arrow on Ashe was particularly standout. And obviously in this game, Prey could have gone Ashe, but he chose not to. At the Season 5 Regional, we had the most recent example of a blind pick, which was when CJ Entus played against Jin Air, and it was in the round 2, and we had an Elise versus Elise mirror match in the jungle. and that didn't end up being as relevant as the fact that Ganked by Mom carried on Gangplank, which obviously was a very specialty pick at the time, was just coming into the meta, and got them through to the next round, Jin where they would lose to Ku. So in total, we had 22 instances. You notice there's a few seasons that didn't even have them. But you notice most of the 22 were pretty significant, not just because they decided a series, but as in the teams that won them tended to go on special runs through OGN. The ones that won them consistently tended to either be like very unique specialists like KT Arrows, or just all-time great amazing teams like Frost, or teams that were very good in that era like Shield or Bullets to a degree. Whereas interestingly, a team like Blaze, which aside from very early on, spent the majority of their time as between the second and fourth best team in Korea. As a result, they tended to lose a lot of the blind picks. They lost the majority of them, in fact, because they were nearly always playing the first, second, or third best team at whatever relative time. That meant it was a slightly better team and that beat them out. And so as a result, I think overall, blind pick was a great feature, brought some very interesting different fifth matches, and also, more importantly, it did seem like the better team won the majority of the time. So I'm sad to see blind pick go. I thought it was a very neat quality, and I don't think it's particularly good that we're just replaced by just a fifth game, and now we'll have side disadvantage and problems with really crazy patches with OPs. So I think it's a shame, really.